Hi, my name's Phil. I like talking about politics, and in this video I'd like to discuss how Brexit hasn't finished dividing the UK and never can. At some point, Brexiteers are going to have to decide what they want more, the Union flag or Brexit, because they can't have both. So the EU is applying a tax to high carbon products in an attempt to prevent lots of cheap imports undercutting their own businesses as a result of lower environmental standards as they raise their own environmental standards. It's a monumental task which the EU is having a great many problems implementing. I suppose a little bit like ETIAS. It may experience a few delays in being rolled out properly, but this is the direction of travel. And what we have here is an example of something new that the EU is doing. And the UK, as a third country, is going to have to decide whether it wants to do the same or not. Now, in this particular case, we have decided that, yeah, we'll go to do the same thing. The UK is no more keen for cheap Chinese imports to be undercutting domestic businesses than is the EU. However, as reported in Politico, we're planning on introducing the measures later than the EU. In fact, we don't really have a definite date yet. So if the EU can roll out their system on schedule, it means there will be a period of time when the EU are applying their carbon border adjustment mechanism, as it's called, and the UK is not. And this would represent such a huge divergence from the EU that it will be noticed in Northern Ireland. Last year, the Conservatives negotiated the Windsor Framework with the EU and then some extra adjustments with the DUP in order to deal with the way Brexit is diverging Britain from Northern Ireland. But the various fixes and fiddles that they applied were only really dealing with the level of divergence that had been applied up until that point. Every time the EU raises its standards, or in theory we do, but we don't really do that, and we don't do exactly the same, in the same way, we put pressure on that system again. And because the political commitment from everyone, including the UK government, prioritises the Good Friday Agreement, then when Brexit forces us to make a choice between alignment with Ireland and alignment with the UK, Ireland wins every time. There can be no other way. Neither the EU nor the United States would countenance any other choice. And quite frankly, in Britain, we don't want the hassle. So when this high carbon tax comes online, which is expected in 2026, all going to plan, and the UK is still not applying it, then there's going to be a load of extra paperwork required. British businesses importing from China, say, won't need that paperwork because we won't have applied it yet, but Northern Irish businesses will. But also Northern Irish businesses importing from Britain will need it as well. But they won't need it importing from the rest of Ireland because it will be applied wherever these products hit the single market first. So what you'll have is a situation whereby it's easy or easier to do business with the Republic of Ireland than with Britain. The very thing which has created non-stop aggro in Northern Ireland, especially within the DUP and TUV. The hope will be that this new carbon tax is so difficult to implement that there needs to be delays and then the EU and the UK end up applying it at the same time. But if not, expect another blow up within sections of the unionist community in Northern Ireland. And the nature of our extreme Tory Brexit is that this is going to keep happening. Every time the EU wants to raise standards, the UK has to choose whether to mirror the moves or not. If we decide to take advantage of this Brexit sovereignty we're all drowning in, then we force British businesses to have to comply with a load of new red tape, making it harder to trade with our most important market. In some cases, the divergence will make trading impossible. So British businesses suffer, and trade deals elsewhere don't compensate, by the way. Even the government's own figures show that. It's just a net loss to our GDP, meaning fewer decent jobs, lower tax revenues, meaning that public services suffer, and the rate of tax has to go up, as it's been doing ever since Brexit. Or we could choose to do what the EU does. We won't have decided it, by the way. We used to. We used to help make those rules. Now we won't. So we'll just have to decide what the EU has decided to do, and at the same time. Now that means no extra trade friction with the EU, but it means we're choosing not to exercise our sovereignty in the interests of prioritising economic performance. And that is always going to be the situation. Our government, of whatever colour, is always going to have to choose between sovereignty, as they see it, and economic performance. And because the public prioritise economic performance, ultimately that's the choice governments are going to have to increasingly make as fewer and fewer people decide they can be bothered defending Brexit. If we prioritise the economy, it means being a rule taker. And once people realise that, the entire concept of Brexit is dead. But let's say people never realise this. This is what Brexiteers want, for the public to never join those dots, to never see that we have to follow rules in order to trade with anyone, not just the EU. Well, then they need to sacrifice their flag. You know, the Union flag in its modern form incorporates the cross of St. Patrick. But the only way for Brexit to survive is for Ireland to reunify. Northern Ireland is going to continue to create massive amounts of friction with Brexit. If the EU apply this carbon tax in 2026 and the UK is not ready to go at the same time, as reports suggest it won't be, then there's going to be another bust up in Northern Ireland, another big one. Now, I don't imagine that Labour are interested in divergence themselves, so once they're calling the shots properly, after a few years we can probably avoid further bust-ups for a while. But then, let's say Labour don't introduce electoral reform, the Tories come back in, and if we suppose the Tories are still committed hard Brexiteers, the divergence will begin again. And every time it does, it will cause another bust-up with Northern Ireland. Unionism will lose more and more credibility as they struggle to find solutions that simply aren't there. And we end up at the point where a border poll seems likely to succeed, and then it takes place and potentially then Ireland reunifies. Practical Brexiteers will be delighted, I'm sure, because it's just that most of them can't publicly admit that. But then the Union flag has to revert back to its 18th century form. So the modern Union flag, which these Brexiteers claim to worship, is consigned to history. Now, I think that was going to happen at some point anyway. But Brexit, if we continue with a hard, divergent Brexit, is surely going to hasten it. And so Brexiteers need to choose their flag or their Brexit, because they cannot coexist harmoniously. Or maybe Brexiteers won't have to choose. Perhaps enough of the public will choose a pragmatic path towards rejoining the European family again, because there are literally no benefits to Brexit. It means having to follow rules that we don't decide if we want to trade. It means getting stuck at the border for anyone travelling by road to the continent at peak holiday times. It means lower quality food, along with shortages and higher costs of both food and medicines. It means difficulty in getting enough medical staff for the NHS. And it also means having to buy a new bloody flag at some point. But there we are. Those are my thoughts. If you enjoyed the video, please subscribe for further content and click the like button. You can also sign up for memberships if you'd like to support the channel further. Thanks for watching, and until next time, I'll see you later.